Mark, I'll tell you, we're about ready to watch our podcast that we just recorded. And quite honestly, I've been doing this since 1989. And I learned a lot of information from you today on our topic. I usually get a tidbit or two from you in every one of our podcasts, even if it's on lending. But I'll be honest with you, I walked away with probably 5 or 6 things that I have always been interested in, but didn't know I needed to know the specifics that you covered. So I think our audience is really going to find this a great podcast.
Good. Yeah, I think it always comes down to you're not alone. There's people that can help, and you need to reach out for help because people don't necessarily know your situation without you reaching out first. And so that's going to be kind of my takeaway from today is we're here to help. There's a lot of people in your area, no matter where you are, that are happy to help you. But you got to reach out if you want to go that route. So.
Sounds good, Mark. Audience, everybody stand by. Here comes SoCo's most interesting podcast. Good morning, Mark. How you doing, buddy?
What are we doing? All right. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to SoCo's most interesting podcast. I am one of your hosts, Mark Ditkof, sitting here with our other host, Chris Bongirno. Chris, are we having a wonderful day?
We are, Mark. Any better, it would be like paid vacation. So yeah, I'm in pretty good spirits.
That's good. I've been told by you already that I'm cranky. So for anybody watching this, if I sound cranky during this show, then that's Chris's fault, because if you ever call somebody cranky, it makes them cranky, of course.
Yeah.
And so
now you're manifesting crankiness.
I'm good. I'm good. So let's talk today about short sales and foreclosures.
Okay.
The reason I think that's something that's worthwhile to talk about is we are already seeing an uptick in our Southern Colorado market for the number of houses that are potentially going into foreclosure. And we'll talk about what that means. And then also requiring a short sale, which again, we can talk a little bit about what that means, because I think it's going to hit more and more people, and it's going to get more and more prevalent as we head into a market that seems to be prices staying pretty consistent. Interest rates have not dropped, and people are a little bit upside down. Am I right?
I think you are, Mark. And, kind of what we talked about on a prior podcast is that increases for current homeowners and property taxes and homeowners insurance is putting additional pressures on folks. So it goes above and beyond being upside down. Inflation has been going fairly strong here the last couple of years. But we've got this kind of perfect storm with homeowners insurance and property taxes impacting people. So we kind of touched on it in the prior podcast in terms of reasons why we're starting to see that uptick. And I think today we're going to talk more about what happens when you get into the position of those things really impacting you.
I love it. And so one thing to note for anybody watching especially is you do not have to be upside down in order for your house to go into foreclosure. And you don't have to be facing foreclosure in order for you to short sale your property, right? They are not directly related where if you're one, then you're the other. We've dealt with cases literally this month, both individually, where we had somebody that had to sell their house that was not upside down, meaning they did not owe more than it was worth, but they were facing foreclosure. At the same time, we have somebody else that's actually going to be closing very soon who is not in foreclosure or was not facing foreclosure, but they did owe more than it was worth and had to go through the short sale process. And so don't think that both of them have to correlate together. You can't have one without the other, at least at the initial phase of the process.
And those are great points to make, Mark, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions about both of those, and that's why we're going to be talking about it today. But the other thing that I want to do is if anybody is thinking about, oh my gosh, we're facing financial hardship and potentially getting into foreclosure, you're already in foreclosure, there are a lot of resources, not only your local real estate professional like Mark and his team, but also state provided resources. And there's some great ones in Colorado, but if you're watching this outside of Colorado, I'm sure your state, local communities also have resources, not just on education, but in a lot of cases, they can step in and help with some financial support or other things. So I highly recommend, we're not going to go through those things today, but I highly recommend if you need some assistance, Google search that, what assistance is available for foreclosure in your local area. And I would also reach out to your lender before you're not making payments. Find out what they may or may not be able to do to help you out. Doesn't hurt to talk to them, right? You're not going to get a late payment because you've asked them about what your options are. So, Mark, where do you want to start off on our discussion today?
Let's talk about foreclosures. And so we're going to touch on this real quick, and then we'll talk about short sales after. And you guys will understand by the end of this episode kind of how they are related, but again, not directly. And so a foreclosure, Chris, is my understanding, and you're the lender here, so you'll tell me if I'm right or wrong, but basically says that I signed a note when I bought a house saying that I'll make payments. And if I stop making those payments, the bank takes the house back, right? After a certain amount of time of non-payment. And that's the foreclosure process where they say, they give you notices and they tell you, hey, if you don't, catch up or whatever it is by a certain amount of time, you're going to lose the house and you need to be out. Am I right when I say it that way?
Yes. So it's the note and the deed of trust go together. So the deed of trust is what creates the lien, and it's the document that's used when the lender forecloses. So if you happen to get a home loan and only sign a note and no deed of trust, they may not be able to take your house. But I've never heard of that happening. So there, you sign two things. The note is the promise to repay. The deed of trust is the instrument used with the lender, the public trustee, the court system, and so forth to foreclose on the home. But if you don't make those payments, you don't get to stay.
Okay. And so if I do end up all the way through the foreclosure process where my house is taken and they auction it and it is sold, I have to find somewhere else to live. Chris, how does having a foreclosure on my record affect me in the future in regards to credit, ability to buy a different home, any of those kind of things? Can you speak to that?
I can, and I'm not going to give any specifics today in terms of what you need to do because there are exceptions to, or loan programs have availability that others don't. What I can tell you, in most circumstances for most buyers, there's going to be a waiting period. And that waiting, and it also depends, is the foreclosure part of a bankruptcy or is it not part of a bankruptcy? So, but there is a waiting period. It could be months, and in most cases it's years, but we're not talking a decade. It can be as little as 12 months, 24 months, 24 months. I was thinking years and saying months. So it could be as short as a year, 2 years, or 4 years, but there are options available, but I would, in most cases, plan on renting initially.
Okay. Yeah. And so if I have that foreclosure on my record, it could be up to 4 years, maybe even more for other circumstances, right?
But in most cases, it's less than that.
And before we're eligible to buy another house using financing, right?
Correct.
Okay. Correct. And so how does that also affect my credit score if I have a house that goes into foreclosure?
Yeah, it's a pretty substantial hit. And it's a hit in two ways, Mark, because you're getting 30-day lates and then 60-day mortgage lates and then 90-day mortgage lates. And then you've got the resolution of foreclosure. So it is really going to take a substantial hit. And there's not much you can do about it in the short term.
Okay. So it also might take quite a while for the credit score to recover, which then also could negatively affect my ability to rent somewhere if they're doing credit checks, right? And so it's kind of a bad situation across the board.
Absolutely.
Okay. Anything else about foreclosures that we need to hit? I mean, that was a really quick overview of the idea of it. But really, it's if you're going into foreclosure and you're getting the letters from the bank and you don't know what to do, I love that you said, reach out to your local and state resources. Also, you could talk to a real estate professional and your lender to see what your options are. I would advise, if you do reach out to a real estate professional, please ask them what their experience is in that situation, because not just any real estate agent is ready to handle the communication required, the length, the time frame required, and all those things to handle somebody that is facing foreclosure.
Two other quick comments about foreclosure, Mark. I am not an attorney or a tax person, but there can be legal and tax consequences. If you happen to destroy the house before you leave, you could be financially held responsible for those repairs, and I don't know, maybe even criminally, depending on when you do it and who has ownership of the home at the time you do those things. So if you are considering that, talk to an attorney before you do anything. And secondly, from a tax standpoint, if the bank takes over your home and they sell it and they make money on it, you could potentially owe taxes in your particular circumstances. You could end up paying capital gains taxes on it. It can be a little complicated. So again, get some advice before you get behind, and talk with the tax person and get those answers.
Yeah, and that is true. If the bank sends your house to foreclosure auction and it does sell for more than what is owed, the proceeds do go to the homeowner. The bank doesn't keep any proceeds above and beyond what is owed, which
Correct.
is typically again the remaining loan amount plus any accrued interest from non-payments. Plus, there's some fees and things like that that they always tack on. But anything that remains, they do have to give back to the homeowner if anything remains.
And you'll end up with a 1099. And whether you have to pay taxes on that depends on your individual tax situation. So that's why you need to talk with the tax person.
Absolutely. Okay, awesome. So that's a little bit about foreclosures. Again, if you have specific questions or you're facing the situation, reach out to us or reach out to somebody local to you that you feel confident that they can help you, at least guide you to where you need to go. So Chris, now let's shift to short sales, which again, a little bit related, but not directly like we've said. Short sale on a property is when I, as a homeowner, need to sell a home for less than what I owe on the property. And that comes into play where you maybe bought a house within the last few years is why we're seeing it. If I didn't put a lot of money down because maybe I bought it using a VA loan, which requires 0 down, FHA is typically 3.5%, especially when you use some down payment assistance programs. A lot of people, when they do those programs, they enter the home day one underwater, right? They owe more than what it's worth because they got extra assistance that went into it. Especially when you go to sell the property, there are commissions and fees that can apply, meaning that you don't always get 100% of the sales price. And so when that's the case, if I have to sell a home for less than what I owe for whatever reason, the bank, you're shorting the bank. It's called a short sale. Is that accurate?
It sounds accurate to me, Mark. And, one of the things to keep in mind is that when you're facing a short sale is that there's more to it than selling your home and you owe $200,000 and you send the lender a check for $180,000, right? You don't get to just choose to sell it for less.
That's absolutely accurate. And so there's a few things that goes into it. One is you have to provide the bank what's called a hardship letter. It's a letter from you to the bank that actually states why you have to sell the house right now for less than what it's owed, right? If you just say, hey, I just don't want the house anymore and it's not worth as much as it was before, I owe too much on it or whatever, I'd like to short sale it. They will probably deny that letter, right? You have to show a hardship, and it could be a lot of different things. We've seen medical hardships, right? Somebody ended up in the hospital and they can't live in this home anymore. You've got ones that are
primary wage earner.
Death, exactly. Yep. Spouse passed away or whatever that looks like. You've got ones that are job related, right? My job is moving me across the country and I can't afford to keep the house and it's worth less than it was. We had one where the house got damaged to the point where it was no longer worth it. And it was also uninhabitable. And so it was like, look, I can't live in the house. And because of the damage it's received, that insurance didn't cover, I can't fix it. I can't do anything with it. I have to sell it. And so the bank did approve a hardship like that as well. And so those are things that are very real, though. You can't just say, I just don't want it anymore. You have to have an actual reason why you're selling it.
And that review takes what, Mark, a day or two?
The review from the bank?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So the only thing that's the only thing short about a short sale is that you're shorting the bank. It takes so long to go through these things. We've put houses on the market that are pending short sale approval. And I get all these real estate agents all the time calling me saying, oh my gosh, I have an investor and they can close in a week. I say, that's so great. It's going to take 90 to 120 days minimum for us to get through this process. So your quick close investor doesn't really mean a whole lot to us in this case.
And to know whether a short sale is an option for a homeowner, Mark, do you start out calling your lender and submitting that letter, and then they work with you to get other documentation? Do they talk to their lender first? Do they talk to a real estate professional first? How does that like initial, okay, let's go down this road start for a homeowner?
First thing I would do is I would talk to a real estate professional, because you don't know if you need to short the house, right? What if it's worth more than you realize and they can get it sold where the bank does get their full money back and you can just avoid the entire process? But if the real estate agent then tells you, yeah, do you know what? You owe 200,000. I think I can only sell it for 180,000. We're going to have to talk to the bank. Your real estate professional at that point should point you to the loss mitigation department of your lending institution, whoever owns the loan on the property, right?
And hopefully before you're missing payments.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, a lot of times it's before you're missing payments, because again, if you're not going into foreclosure, you might not be missing payments. You're just, you could float it, but it's not easy or whatever that looks like.
Yeah, if you know it's going to happen, you're eating up your savings account to make the payments. Because like we talked about, death of a primary wage earner or a job change, and you know that in 3 months or in 2 months, you've got to sell the home because you're not going to have the resources to make those payments. My recommendation is start this process now. Don't wait. At least gathering information.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so you're going to talk to that department of your lender, and they're going to then, and you'll have to sign an authorization with that lender as well to let your real estate professional also have access to talk to them directly, assuming that's the route you're going. And they'll give you a whole list of documents that you need to put together, and specific clauses and addendums and things like that that have to go into the listing paperwork. If they approve your hardship and they approve to go through the short sale process, that's your bank approves it, they will send an appraiser to the property to get actual market value. And depending upon the loan type, they'll have a minimum net that goes into it. And so for instance, if it's an FHA loan on the property, they'll send an appraiser to the property. And when they get that valuation, the bank says they have to net at least 88% of that appraised value for them to approve the short sale. And that is net after all commissions, title fees, other inspection things that get put on it, whatever that looks like, all of that, they have to walk away with 88% of the appraised value on an FHA loan. VA, conventional, all those ones might have their own standards, right? And so talk to your bank about what that looks like. But that's minimums, right? And so you've got to go through that process, and it can take a couple of weeks to get the appraisal back, right? And so if your bank says, yes, we'll do this, yes, we have the valuation, get it on the market, get it sold. Normally they'll give you 120 days or so to get an acceptable offer and submit that to the bank to start processing. And it can take another 60 to 90 days for them to process those documents, assuming they've got all the things they need. But again, they're going to continue to ask for more and more documentation, changes, things like that can delay. So you need a buyer that's going to be very patient to go through the process, because again, it's not going to close in a typical 30 to 45-day window.
And Mark, just to clarify, it's really kind of a two-step process, right? You've got to approve the bank. The lender has to approve the initial hardship request and approve the documentation that your agent's going to use to list the home with all the extra addendums and so forth that you mentioned. But then the second step is, once you've got an actual offer, there's a second approval process. And now the actual transaction itself needs to be reviewed and signed off on by the lender as well. Am I understanding that that's what you're describing?
Absolutely, because they vet the buyer of the property really, really hard. In a typical purchase transaction, a proof of funds, I'll take a letter from a bank if somebody's a cash buyer. And if it's a signed letter from the bank or a copy of their bank statement that shows they have the funds, typically that's good enough. That's not always good enough when you're going through this process. I mean, they really dot their I's and cross their T's. And so just be ready to submit the same documents in different versions multiple times. Another thing to note is that, and this is why I say, so short sales aren't technically related to a foreclosure, but you actually have to be in default in order for them to approve the short sale as well. If you are up to date on payments, they'll say, no, you're up to date. There's no reason to sell it. And so they actually advise you stop making payments, right? Because that way they can, and I wouldn't encourage you stop making payments until you've had these conversations and know what you're doing. But once they approve it, say, yeah, your hardship's approved, all that, they're going to advise that you stop making payments. You have to be in default 60 or 90 days, right? And that's going to hurt your credit, right? And then again, this short sale is going to go on your record and all those things. And so these are one of those last chance options that we don't encourage people to do unless you can't keep the house and you have to sell it for less than it's worth. It's better than foreclosure, right? It's better than just letting it go to auction and having that on your record, because it shows that you did try, you sold it and all those. It's just the house itself was worth less than you owed based on whatever conditions existed. And so that's a big thing to know, though, too, is you are still going to take a credit hit and you are still going to have to go into default, which technically you'll go into the foreclosure process, but it shouldn't hit auction, assuming you can get it sold through the short sale.
Yeah, and lenders have a date for that auction date. Correct?
Yeah, and a lot of times they won't even assign an auction date if you stop making the payments by the time the lender has approved that you can go through the short sale process. You probably won't even get to a point where they'd assign an auction date because they know what's happening and they defer it because they know they've given you the 120 days. Plus, if you have an offer, they're processing that. But if you're already facing foreclosure,
that's what
you'll know a date.
Out. Yeah.
Chris, that's so important, because the more time you give somebody before the auction date, the better chance you have of actually getting the home. So kind of jumping back to the foreclosure idea, we've got actually a house, we're closing on it today. And the day we're recording this, right? That she was facing foreclosure. The attorney called us 10 days before the auction date.
Yep.
That said, we need to sell this house. And so we rushed. I mean, we got the photography ready. We got it on the market. We collected offers, right? We had to price it so low to know that we were going to get an acceptable offer. And she wasn't seeking a short sale. She had equity, but she had to get it sold before it went to auction. We ended up getting a whole bunch of offers over the weekend, thank goodness. And once we submitted the accepted offer to the bank, they gave us a 30-day extension on the auction. And we're closing today, right? And so she did avoid foreclosure.
Because I've been faced with customers calling me and saying, hey, my auction date is in 2 weeks or the end of next month, and I'm interested in short selling my house, and your company is the lender. Who do I talk to? And if you're starting that process, it's more stressful on you, but you really run the risk of not getting the short sale squared away prior to. And one of the things that I would recommend, and I touched on it at the beginning, Mark, is get some legal advice when you're facing foreclosure and or short sale, as well as tax advice, because it may or may not be in your best interest to also file bankruptcy. There are, I'm sure, circumstances where it makes sense and where it does not make sense. But I would incorporate that, because whether you are doing a short sale or a foreclosure, in either circumstances, you're defaulting on your agreement to repay. And there can be legal and tax consequences for both of those. So I can't emphasize enough, get information and make some informed decisions. It's very painful to go through this. I know hearing bad news is not great, but better to have that news and be able to make informed decisions than try to fix the problem after it's done.
That's so true. And again, the more time you have, the more time that you can evaluate your options, talk to the people you need to talk to, right? Nobody that's going into foreclosure doesn't have the opportunity to know the situation well in advance, right? No bank is sending you a letter that's saying, hey, you missed a payment once, we're sending you to auction next week, right? I mean, this takes months to process. And so most people that call us late in the game is really due to they're scared, or they don't know who to talk to, or they don't know what to do.
Well, and it's like they don't want to talk to the doctor and find out the bump on their back is cancer, right? It's kind of the same thing. And it is very painful to get those answers. And I'm going to throw an anecdote out here, even though I interrupted you, and I apologize for that, Mark. I had a husband and wife going through a divorce, and he decided, and they were qualified together, they make the payments together. And he just decided, I'm not going to contribute to the house payment anymore. And he was staying in the house and they were getting divorced. And they ended up in foreclosure because she couldn't make the payment and did not talk to her to an attorney about either the divorce or foreclosure or bankruptcy, because she was trying to do it all on her own, and ultimately ended up talking with a divorce attorney and a bankruptcy attorney and had to file bankruptcy. But it ended up going through foreclosure, no opportunity for a short sale. And so again, don't stick your head in the sand and ignore a greater problem. This is already a very difficult situation, foreclosure or short sale. Get information. Enough of the lectures, Mark. Sorry about that.
No, that's outstanding. And so it's anecdotal, but it's real, right? Like you've got time once you receive these first letters. You typically know if you're not making payments. Maybe you don't, right? Maybe it's somebody else's obligation to make the payment. You don't even know they're not making it. But you're going to get the letters, you're going to get the notifications and things like that. And so make sure, again, the moment you get it, talk to somebody that, either a real estate professional, your lender, an attorney, a tax person, whatever, just to get the ball rolling. Because again, the more time you have, the more options you have. Once you get us, like again, this lady that we're closing on today, if we had more than 10 days, we could have fully marketed the property, probably gotten her more money, right? But our biggest concern was avoiding the auction, right? We had to price it so low.
When they auction it, it's going to be for a low price to make the lender whole. That's their objective, right? Is to get their money out of pocket and cover their expenses. And beyond that, they're not looking to make you whole.
Right. No, absolutely true. And again, they want to make themselves as whole as possible. So it's likely that there's no extra money that goes into it. At auction, it's not super typical that a lot of people bid it up super high because they don't have the ability to walk through the property to verify its condition and all those things. Whereas if we can get it on the market and do regular showings and photography and all those things, you're going to get the highest dollar amount for your property typically when you have the opportunity to actually market it to the public.
Mark, when someone is reaching out to a real estate agent for this, are there designations that people should look for? Is there a short sale or foreclosure specialist designation? Should they ask, well, how many people have you helped through this process? What kind of resources can you offer me? What's kind of the interview process for that?
Yeah, so I don't know if there's actually the letters behind your name kind of designation. There might be, but I gotta tell you, the alphabet soup that comes behind real estate agents' names on their cards, sometimes they're viable, sometimes they're not. I don't have any specific designations for it.
You're just all around awesome, Mark.
Well, I take classes, right? And so we actually have an agent in our office that is certified to teach an education class on short sale and foreclosures, and I've taken her class twice in the last year. And she's going to be teaching
really
again.
What I'm asking is, they really need to interview the agent and understand what their experience is, what classes have you taken, what's your background, how many clients have you helped successfully, those kind of things. I mean, really, it should be an interview because it is a complicated, involved process, whether it's a foreclosure or whether it's a short sale. Would you agree that it's complicated?
Oh, it's incredibly complicated. It's not typical. And again, if you don't have an agent that knows what they're doing, it's very likely they're going to drop the ball and screw the whole thing up for you. And so I would encourage, absolutely, you need to ask a question like, how many have you helped? And I want the addresses so I can look them up and show that that house actually did avoid foreclosure or did get sold as a short sale, because those things are documented. I want to see proof, because I just hate the idea of an agent trying to make something up saying they do this all the time, and then you're the guinea pig that they're testing their skills on.
Right.
It needs to be something that they really know the process, are well versed in the process, and are ready to go through a very long and high communicative version of a sale that sometimes it goes through, sometimes it doesn't, but they need to be the one leading the charge.
Mark, for our homeowners in Colorado, how can they reach you if they've got some follow-up questions for you, or they want to interview you to try to help them out? Where can they find you?
So we're on all the major social media platforms at Onyx Home Group. That's Onyx with a Y. And yeah, message us and say, hey, I have questions about short sales and foreclosures. who do I talk to? And even if you're not in your area, we know real estate agents that are very, very good at this process all over the nation, really, but especially the state of Colorado because of the resources available. Chris, if they have lending questions, where are they going to find you?
All my contact information will be below in the comments section on YouTube. That's the best way to get a hold of me. I promised I am going to work on some of the hashtag. My last name is kind of complicated to spell. So I'm like, well, I don't want to do hashtag Bongirno. So I'm going to come up with something that works, and then people will be able to find me that way. Mark, as usual, just spot on with some great information. And I think the message from both of us is, here's a little tidbit of information, but it's so much bigger than a YouTube podcast video that we really encourage people, Google search, that's important. I do it. Yahoo.com, to be fair, search it. But you need to have a conversation with a real estate professional, attorney, tax person at some point to get you and your family through a very difficult and painful time.
Absolutely agree. And so we're going to encourage everybody watching this, please like and subscribe. Send us ideas on other things you'd like us to talk about, current events in our market, or other things that are all interesting in Southern Colorado. Chris, it has been a pleasure talking to you today, and I can't wait for our next episode.
Thanks, Mark. We'll see you guys next time on SoCo's Most Interesting Podcast.